Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome on stage your moderator, Julia Chatterley, and the distinguished panelists for this seminar on digital public infrastructure, stacking up the benefits.
What a wonderful afternoon here in Washington, D.C. So great to have you all joining us. And may I express my deepest gratitude and appreciation for our distinguished guests, for the panelists, and for this wonderful audience. I think it is a round of applause time, people. I'm very deeply touched that Queen Máxima has chosen to spare her star power to come again to the IMF to talk about digital infrastructure and the role it plays to promote deeper financial inclusion, a topic that Her Majesty has championed for years. And equally, very, very grateful to Minister Sitharaman. India is a shining light in this area, and I could not be more excited to have a chance to hear from you about India's experience. I am going to say only two things. One, about the criticality of financial inclusion and how digital makes it so much more likely that people who had no access to markets, to money, to opportunities, because of digital can gain that access. But it is not going to happen without a concerted attention and effort, and Queen Máxima, as the UN Secretary General's Special Advocate for Inclusive Finance for Development, has been marshalling the world in the right direction. And secondly, to say that when we discuss this topic, it is so much more effective not to talk only about the things we aspire to do, but to talk about the things we have actually done. And who is better but Minister Sitharaman to talk about the things that are actually done? With this, I would pass the floor to Her Majesty Queen Máxima. Welcome.
Thank you, Ms. Georgieva, Mr. Sitharaman, Mrs. French Gates, Mr. Nilekani, Mr. Schulman, ladies and gentlemen, it is really a great pleasure to join you in person at this year's annual meeting and to hear from so many thought leaders in technology, development, and finance. These are challenging times for the world economy, and people living in emerging markets are being hit particularly hard. Yet this seminar highlights a bargaining and a promising approach to make economies work better for everyone, offering vulnerable people a real opportunity to build a better life. Digital public infrastructure, or DPI like we now name it, is generally understood as interoperable, open, and inclusive systems supported by technology to provide essential public and private services in the public interest. Over the past decade, as UN Secretary General's Special Advocate, I have seen how inclusive DPIs can have a transformative impact on even the poorest households and businesses. Safe, transparent, and interoperable system for payment, identity, and data sharing have really empowered millions of small merchants, men and women, rural and urban. And today, they can easily open an account or receive and make any payments with their own mobile phones. Inclusive DPIs can catalyze digital contracts and e-commerce solutions. And this, ladies and gentlemen, creates more efficient and competitive markets and provides new opportunities to peoples that were previously left behind. And it is not just in finance. They can also support health, think about education, think about sustainability. During the COVID pandemic, DPIs allowed welfare to be delivered directly to the digital wallets of those who need it most, and also supported the rollout of vaccines at unprecedented speeds. So, what does this look like in practice? India has shown one way with the Indian stack. It combines foundational digital ID, an interoperable payment system, a digital credentials ledger, an account aggregator to support empowerment and protection. And the results have been dramatic. India has achieved over 80% of financial inclusion in just 6 years, compared to the 46 years it would have taken without a DPI approach. So 6 years versus 46 years. Brazil, Peru, Singapore, and Estonia have also developed DPI models that bring together IDs, payments, and e-governance use cases with real clear results. Of course, DPIs will vary by country. Different contexts require different designs. But in the most successful cases, we do see some common features. The best DPIs are inclusive, interoperable, and support essential public and private services. They're also safe and trusted and ensure robust data protection. And by the way, the fact that you have DPIs, you have this public name into it, does not mean that the public sector can actually make it. Also, the private sector can do it, but it has a public interest. So please, let us share our experiences and learn from the best examples to spread the benefits even further. The G20, the IMF, the World Bank, the UN, and the Bank of International Settlements can help governments and central banks exchange knowledge. New global platforms, now the Digital Public Good Alliances, can bring more voices into the conversation. The World Bank and new emerging financing platforms like Co-Develop can also mobilize the finance needed to deploy and scale up essential infrastructure. In my role as honorary patron of the G20 Global Partnership for Financial Inclusion, I'm really delighted that we are crafting policy recommendations for DPI under the Indian presidency. By bringing the public and private sectors together around DPIs that are truly inclusive, we can make real progress on the Sustainable Development Goals and in building increased resilience. We have so many people left out in our economies. And if digital will provide an opportunity, we will have to bring and build up the roads, the traffic lights, the traffic rules to actually make this work for the benefit of everyone. So please do pay attention to this. Thank you so much.
Good afternoon, Your Majesty Queen Máxima of Netherlands, Kristalina, Ms. French Gates, Mr. Nilekani, and Mr. Schulman. And dear colleagues, good afternoon again. It's a great pleasure for me to be able to participate today in this seminar on the theme of digital public infrastructure, stacking up the benefits, which is very relevant as we are dealing with multiple challenges, including macroeconomic and pandemic-related ones. Available instances show that the potential of DPI to contribute to both public and private sectors are enormous and can transform the development trajectory of countries even under difficult times. In India, during the last couple of years, We have seen how DPI can contribute to targeted, quick and efficient, and inclusive service delivery through innovative methods developed by both public and private sector initiatives. Foundational building blocks approach of India's stack, digital identity that is, digital payments, and consent-based data sharing has helped us to improve our governance, bring ease of doing business and enable ease of living for our people. Leveraging the potential of identity and payments of through DPI alone, India's record opening of 462.5 million low-cost bank accounts, with 56% account holders being women. This has enabled us to transform the government service delivery by building the world's largest direct benefit transfer systems. Our DPI-based direct benefits transfer system has aided about 650 million people who received $322 billion directly into their accounts, which have led to an overall savings of more than $27 billion just across key central government services and schemes. The Aadhaar through the eKYC has also brought down costs of verification, leading to savings in costs for customer acquisition from 500 to 700 rupees, that is $6 to $9 per person, to 3 rupees in Indian rupee, that is, which is 0.4 cents. That is the cost of acquisition today. Due to consent-based data exchange framework, the cost of loan processing is estimated to have declined by almost 75%. Lowering of such transaction costs for public and private sector alike ensures onboarding of more people into the formal financial system and therefore more inclusion. The greatest potential of DPI in reaching the last mile became evident during the pandemic. About $4.5 billion was transferred during the COVID pandemic directly into the bank accounts of 160 million beneficiaries. Not only this, India's pandemic recovery efforts were greatly supported by the development of CoWIN, an app based on the DPI, which we were able to scale up to deliver over 2 billion doses of vaccines. This demonstrates the evolutionary power of DPI, in which the stack is common, but the new scalable solutions evolve and can be developed on the common stack to deal effectively even with unforeseen situations. In India, we have various other DPI initiatives across sectors, like Diksha, a DPI which serves close to 500 million school children on an open network for digital commerce, which is ONDC in short, which is an open network to democratize digital commerce for millions of MSMEs. All this success around DPI was a collaborative effort where development of India Stack is a mission mode. Development of the India Stack in a mission mode was also guided by a focus on supporting innovation across a vibrant ecosystem where private innovations thrived. Government played a catalytic role, acting as an anchor client and establishing institutions to ensure continuity in India Stack's operations. Despite being digital, DPI has some inherent features like interoperability, openness, low-cost access, and transparency, making it inclusive by design, and is helping India in addressing the various digital divide challenges. The scalability feature of our DPI makes the investments economical and is therefore beneficial to the end user, as the cost can be minimized or the access can be made altogether free. This is pro-inclusion. The interoperability of DPI, as in the case of India, allows for multiple solutions to be developed for promoting inclusion. For instance, the UPI, our payment system, is used not only for smartphones, but also feature phones by just dialing a *99 hashtag, or in assisted mode with no phone at all. As a result, UPI transactions are increasingly rapidly moving forward. Today, more than 68% of total payments are made through UPI in India. In March 2023, in just March 23 alone, India has witnessed 8.7 billion UPI transactions and overall growth of 82% in financial year 22-23 over the previous year. Better targeting achieved through DPI, including gender-sensitive focus or targeting the vulnerable sections. For example, leveraging the Nandan accounts, which is a popular mission mode opening of accounts for all citizens of India without missing out on anybody who till then didn't have a bank account. So for example, leveraging Nandan accounts and Aadhaar platforms, which is an identity platform, we were able to provide more than 90 million cooking gas connections under Pradhan Mantri Ujjwala Yojana as on 30th January 2023. DPI thus have tremendous transformational potential by facilitating innovations continuously by involving both private sector and government effectively. Development and leveraging of DPI indeed sets a virtuous cycle in motion which incessantly deliver huge benefits for countries to fast-paced development processes. Let me congratulate Kristalina Georgieva and her team for identifying this important area for discussion at this important forum today. I also appreciate the IMF for their good work in this area. I'm confident that examining how we can leverage DPI to further gains and stack up the benefits would go a long way in strengthening our endeavor to achieving strong, inclusive, resilient, and sustainable economic growth. I look forward to engaging in discussions, for an engaging discussions today. Thank you very much.
May we all express our appreciation for Queen Máxima and for Minister Sitharaman. Well done. I think we can offer you a better seating for the panel, front seat for the panel. Thank you.
Okay, let's talk. I'll echo my thanks, we've already heard it, and I'll introduce our panel once again, Managing Director, of course. Can I also introduce Nandan Nilekani, he's the co-founder and chairman of Infosys Technologies. We also have Melinda French-Gates, as you heard, co-chair of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and Dan Schulman is president and CEO of PayPal. So we have a great collection now of individuals to talk about how we learn from India's experience and push that forward, I think, for other nations too. Much to discuss. Managing Director, you've caught my attention now, so I'm going to start with you. I think we understood there the numbers from India are absolutely mind-blowing. The question is, how do we push this on now and see other countries adopt some of these techniques and learn, I think, from the experiences? Why do you see this as fundamental and key to economic development on all fronts, I think?
Well, thank you, Julia. Full disclosure, on this panel, the experts are the people on my right. But I have the privilege, the honor to be able to take your wisdom, your vision, and then bring this fantastic institution to be the transmission line so it benefits billions of people through development. What did we learn? We learned three very important things. One, digital public infrastructure with its building blocks that are public and private can tremendously accelerate development because it makes the inaccessible accessible. It allows the excluded to be included. And it does it in a very simple, intuitive manner. You don't have to have a PhD degree. For my staff, nothing wrong with the PhD degree. But to benefit, you really have these building blocks that make it possible. Two, we learned that we have a role to play on standards and interoperability because we can accelerate access for countries to what others have done. And I can say just over the last 2 years, we have engaged with countries to learn from India, but also to innovate on their own and then make these flowers bloom. Three, both Queen Máxima and Minister Sitharaman talked about that, inclusion.
Right.
Our main job in this institution is to provide opportunities for employment and growth for people to reach their potential, to men and women. And this is the most effective accelerator of inclusion there is. So I'm very keenly interested for all of us to learn from the experts on this panel what we should be imagining as our goal for building blocks in an interoperable manner for inclusion. And I'm sorry, my apologies to everybody. I have been coughing my way through this week. So if I do a little bit more of this coughing, very sorry about that.
Perfect. You're making sure everyone's awake, which is perfect. Nandan, can I ask you, we're going to pass some water down, if that's possible. Perfect. You're also the godfather, or one of the godfathers of Digital India. I mean, you were at the foundational stages of creating a unique digital ID for Indian citizens. And I think when I was learning ahead of this panel what the India stack is and how swiftly it's moved, and we heard that from the finance minister, the difference it's made in such a short period of time. I think that's fundamental. The basics that are required in your mind for creating what we talk about today as digital public infrastructure. Start there and the power that you saw, what, a decade ago?
Well, I think digital public infrastructure is actually a philosophy and a belief that technology can actually transform a society, can improve lives, can do financial inclusion, then can create economic growth in a more equitable manner and so on. But also I think one of the reasons for India's success is political will. And I think in India, Prime Minister Modi, Finance Minister Sitharaman are what I would call as digital first ministers. In other words, when they look at a public policy issue, they say, can we do this digitally? And that's how companies think, how to be digital first. Now we have governments thinking like that. So that's a big part of the success of the Indian model. But I think the approach has been to build different layers and blocks over time. Aadhaar was the first, and now we have 1.3 billion people with Aadhaar. It does 80 million.
Which is the digital ID.
Yes, other than the digital ID, it's online verification. It does 80 million verifications a day. As Minister Sitharaman mentioned, UPI does 8.7 billion transactions a month. About 300 million people use it. And 50 million small merchants take payments in UPI using a QR code. And now with the account aggregator, we'll see a massive democratization of credit, where people will use their digital footprints as collateral to get access to credit. So this is a huge difference where data becomes a lifeline for people to improve their lives. So I think these are all very important things, and it's happened by a coalition, political leadership, technocrats, bureaucrats, other thinkers, the parliament, the judiciary. We had to pass Aadhaar laws and all. And I think now there's a shared vision in India that it is possible to change a society. It is possible to create a new growth model, which is more equitable and more, broad-based. To give an example, we have about 11 or 12 million companies in our GST system, which again was pioneered by Minister Sitharaman. And every one of them now with their digital footprint can get access to credit through the account aggregator system. So imagine if 12 million businesses get credit and can add 2 employees, that's 25 million new employee jobs that are created. So this is how you think about technology as directly relating to society. And there are many other DPIs in India on education, Diksha, we have ONDC for commerce, we have something for language. So I think it's a very fundamental strategic way of thinking about the future of a country by leveraging technology for digital transformation and better and equitable growth.
Yeah, I think that's the way that we have to consider the stack. It's not just about payments, it's also about healthcare, it's about education, it's about layers of society and pushing it out in different forms. Melinda, there's many directions I could take with you on this, but I did see last month you tweeted out a conversation that you were having with entrepreneurs in India, women actually, importantly, about how transformational the payment side of this digital public infrastructure has been and what it's meant for their communities too. The human, I think, benefits here are important to understand as the sort of larger scale.
I think that piece is incredibly important. I was thinking a little bit earlier this morning is we talk up so often at these big gatherings about macroeconomics, and my understanding of the digital public infrastructure in India is that it helped India weather the shocks of COVID, the economic shock. So we talk at this gigantic macro level, and we should. It's really, really important. But at the micro level, we also need to think of the difference it makes. I was thinking this morning about the first time I got $1 in my hands as a little girl, and I spent it differently than my sister did, and I spent it differently than my brothers did. And I think about the time when I got my first little bit paying job in high school or college, or my first real job after college, the freedom it gives anybody, but in particular a woman. If you're in a society where women really have not, there is no society in the world, let's be clear, where women are equal yet. None, not even the one we're sitting in today. But if you're a woman in society, when you get money in your hands, it's power. Money is power. And it changes everything in your household. And so I have met women all over the world, in Tanzania, in Kenya, in India, in Bangladesh, who say, everybody in my household looks at me differently when I have money. And it's money that they save. I mean, when you get your first money and you have somewhere to put it, and it doesn't go under the mattress and it doesn't sit in your pocket, and you learn to save it, then you have savings. And so women will tell you, I see myself differently because I have money. My mother-in-law, if I'm in India, sees myself differently. As was just spoken about, you start to build a financial future for yourself from means in your hands to savings, to credit, to insurance. And then this digital stack, as you're hearing from Nandan and others, allows so many other things. So to me, having been in this development community now for 23 years, this is a tool we didn't have, 20 years ago. And it short circuits so many of the problems to actually, when a woman gets a phone in her hand to have that money, we're actually finally talking about power and societal change. And I think, as was said well from the minister, it brings in so many people who are on the margins of society to now participate in economic opportunity.
Yeah, you wrote a brilliant article for the Financial Times in the past week talking about the 28 $8 to $9 trillion opportunity of just bringing women into the workforce and how digitization can be fundamental in achieving that. We'll talk about the how shortly, but I want to bring Dan in as well, because you're sort of a pioneer of a piece of this, which is digital payments, and in many respects, and operate still all over the world, were there long before governments were talking about building digital infrastructure. You were kind of doing it for yourself. So I think understanding who's best to build the rails that then the private sector innovates upon and who catalyzes that is important. How do you think about digital public infrastructure, but from a private sector point of view?
I think it's crucial at this point. All of our lives are digitizing rapidly, whether it be payments or any other form of our life. Having kind of the digital highways and tolls and standards and regulations set are essential for private companies to build upon. I think we live in a world right now where so much of our population struggles to get by. I think we talk about financial inclusion, which typically we talk about access into the financial system. And I think a lot of our conversations now are turning to financial health, which is not just access to banks, but do you have the wherewithal to make ends meet at the end of the month? And I think we have 1.4 billion people outside of the system. We have at least another 1.4 billion ill-served by the system today, paying excessively high interest rates or fees that are unnecessary in a digital world, in a DPI, as the finance minister so eloquently talked about. The cost can come down dramatically. You're right, that is loud.
Explosive.
Yeah, even woke me up from my own speech. And I think we can do things so much faster, and that really matters to so much of the world. And so I think the private and public sector need to come together here. We need to have an infrastructure that we can build on. It needs to be interoperable, and that's an issue that I think we all need to think about, because one country building a digital infrastructure that doesn't have the same standards or regulations aligned with other countries makes it very difficult for the private sector. It also, I think, in many ways is dangerous when we balkanize certain things, because like for cybersecurity,
right,
which is a huge issue as we move into the digital world, the bigger your data set is to spot bad actors in the world, the more effective your algorithms are. And if we balkanize and don't utilize each other's data sets to spot bad things happening in the world, we suboptimize. And so I think this idea of DPI is extraordinarily important, but I think the idea of interoperability and a common set of standards is also incredibly important, because we want the cost of a transaction to approach zero.
Right.
You mentioned just how rapidly transaction costs has come down in India. You think about just international remittances, which is like the lifeblood of so much of a population. Today, when you send $1, 8 cents of that is taken away. It's 8%. You do it digitally, you can do that at well under 1%, maybe even 1/1000th of a cent per transaction type of cost. And so I think we have a huge opportunity to radically change the way that we think about financial health. And I think financial health is like the bedrock of political stability as well. And so I think this is a massively important opportunity, but it's incumbent on all of us to do everything we can to drive it forward.
There's so much in there. Cybersecurity, data privacy, the balance of, in a way, who catalyzes this and builds the foundations. Nandan, you sort of bridge both sides. You worked with the government on digital IDs and building out this infrastructure, but you also see the private sector side, and I think the power of the push from the private sector on innovation. How do you find the balance, particularly if we look beyond India and look at India's example and see how other nations now are building their own stacks and thinking about this? How do you take India's example and perhaps learn and innovate? Because with great networking also comes great challenges, as Dan's sort of pointing out.
I think, Julia, we're actually seeing enormous interest around the world. In fact, many years back, the World Bank started a project called ID4D, and Kristalina was heading it. So she was heading it, and that's when I met her first. And she did an amazing job of running that committee. And I think today there are about 50 countries around the world who are looking at some form of DPI.
Right.
Maybe not everything, but certainly some parts of it. And just this week, at least some of the meetings we have had indicates enormous interest in doing that. I think what has happened because of the India experience, one, it has proved that you can do it. It has proved that you can do it at scale. It has proved that you can do it at extremely low cost. It has proved that it both helps in resilience against vulnerabilities, pandemics, as well as enables economic growth. So now it's no longer an unknown kind of thing. We know it works. Most of the technology problems have been solved. Now it's about countries deciding to do it with the right philosophy, having political leadership, buying in at the highest levels, and making it happen. And I think, thanks to the support of Kristalina, and hopefully when Ajay comes at the bank, I think you're going to see a big push in the next 4 to 5 years, where this will spread very widely. And one more thing I want to add is, we believe that DPI does not require deep pockets. It needs deep conviction. You know, today we live in a world where we want trillions of dollars for climate transition. We want hundreds of billions of dollars for debt relief.
How do you
This is a
prioritize?
fraction of that cost. In fact, it earns itself. The Aadhaar project cost India about $1.5 billion. And as Minister mentioned, it has saved $27 billion.
Quick question, what's internet penetration and connectivity? Because we still
I
have
think
half the
we
world
have
that's not
about
on the
60,
internet.
65, 600 million smartphones. So yeah, about 600 million smartphones. See, I think if you think what are the tools of the new world, everybody should have a digital ID, everybody should have a bank account, everybody should have a smartphone.
Okay.
Then anything can be done. Everything else is built on that.
Because we were talking about this before we came onto the panel, the 3 basic things: a smartphone, a bank account, and a digital ID.
Yes.
That's where every nation
In India,
has to
it's been
begin.
named by the Prime Minister the JAM Trinity. Jandan, which is the bank account, Aadhaar, the ID, and mobile.
That shouldn't cost that much.
Oh, nothing. Peanuts.
We
She
actually-
says.
We did, when I was on the site of 19th Street, we looked into the cost of everybody having access to the internet in Africa.
Right.
$15 billion. This is really on the scale of the benefits it can generate. This is such a modest investment. And I want to say 2 things. One, how critical it is to have an unwavering political commitment. And that when you have it in place, whether it's India or it is Togo, when it is in place, it opens up tremendous opportunities. And the second one is a lesson for institutions like us, the IMF, that we are a transmission line of experience, and we are also a transmission line of political standing, and we should use this more than we have been using it so far. So I'm standing in front of you, and I'm telling you, I think of a world in which the power of connectivity is accessible to everyone. Because when you have this power, then you influence future political decisions.
Yeah.
So you actually democratize society by giving people an avenue to the high corridors of power that did not exist before.
Especially if you can call them on a smartphone. But I do think we need a commission for those 3 things to start providing the financing required for the basics, the ID, the phone, and the bank account. Dan, what about trust? What about giving up all your information, your tax information, your name to a government ultimately, because there is a trust angle here. I mean, try doing this in the United States. I think some people might have a shocker with being ID'd and having all this information known.
I think
there's a balance to find here, surely.
Sure. I think the whole system rides on trust. The whole financial system rides on trust. It is the single most important attribute that we need to assure continues. We see what happens when there isn't trust. We see how quickly bank runs can happen in this day and age, where you have either perfect information or disinformation that leads to changes in trust like that. And so I think this is something that we need to really assure is not compromised whatsoever. There are different cultures around the world. There are different belief sets, even within a country like the United States, you know, in terms of what privacy looks like.
Right.
And trust in either a private sector company or the public government. And I think, you know, as we digitize more and more, our data and our information is out in the world. There's no question about that. And I think we need to put in place a set of rules and regulations, responsible innovation that protects the privacy of our either customers or citizens, and that it is used in ways that are as beneficial as possible to our political systems. I think this is going to be a very difficult balancing act. When I talk about cybersecurity, it's the same thing. Like, do we want a government to see all of our information if they can protect us better by seeing that? And these are trade-offs. We as private companies struggle with that. How much data do we share? Do we share or not? In what circumstances do we do that? My view is we need to share as much data responsibly as we possibly can, because there needs to be a coalition of those of us who care against those who wish to do us harm, and bad actors across the world. And bad actors are very motivated. They are very motivated, and they never stop. There's probably a conference of those who look more like me than you out there, who are thinking about how do they take advantage of the digitalization of the world right now, every day. And so I think this idea of trust and security, availability, and kind of regulatory compliance, these are the things that our system rests upon, and we have to do everything in our power to maintain that.
Nandan?
Oh, I think so. But I think there are obviously risks, but we have to do things in a way to mitigate the risk. For example, in the Indian architecture, data is not in one place. Data is federated. So the banking data is in the banking system, the health records in the health system. The ID system does not know what the ID was used for. We call this as the principle of optimal ignorance. Don't know more than you should know in a system design.
Yeah.
So many of these things have mitigated against this. It's what we call as privacy by design. And also, I think, finally, human beings always do a trade-off between privacy and benefit. I mean, why do you use social media or anything? You give so much information, but you see some benefit. I'll give you an example. I came to the US after, I hadn't come in between, and I came through this thing called global entry. And I was shocked. There were more people in the global entry line than in the regular line. That means more and more people are embracing global entry. Now, what does global entry do? It does face recognition. Nobody was complaining, oh my God, my face recognition. They said, if I do face recognition and walk into the US in 2 minutes, what earlier took half an hour, I'll happily do face recognition. So finally, privacy is about cost to benefit. And what we are finding is that the benefits of some of these things are so high. People are saying, I'm getting so much benefit, I will accept that maybe I will share a bit of data. In any case, the data is spread all over, so it can't be collected, so it's much better.
So the utility function outweighs the fears. It's like social media, quite frankly. We give up our data that freely every day for the utility function it provides. How do we build an inclusive system, Melinda, if we're talking about having these conversations about the importance of this being inclusive? I think one of the big fears as we see greater digitization is that it widens the divide for perhaps those that don't have access to the internet, and that we talk about inequalities today, and actually the danger is perhaps that for those that are involved in this and are benefiting, the benefits are clear and we've talked about them. For those that still don't have access and are struggling to find electricity on a daily basis to charge a smartphone, they get even further backtracked.
It's a great question. I think you start in the design by saying this is for everybody. This isn't for just the middle class of our country or the elites. This is for everybody. And part of the goal of the system is to bring people from the informal sector into society who maybe have no birth certificate or ID of any sort. And I think this is where institutions like the World Bank and the IMF come in. I mean, these are force multipliers, not just for our financial system, but can be force multipliers for good. And so I see other projects like at the World Bank, the GPT-2X project, which is basically has 38 countries really looking at multiple different systems that have been set up and saying, what's right for me, for my country, and for my citizens? So we're not trying to relearn this lesson everywhere we go. But there are many countries. Malawi's a great example. Tanzania, India's done it, where you use a biometric reader and you go out into the township, or you go out into the rural villages, or you take that person's biometric ID from their fingers, and they don't have a smartphone yet, but they have figured out a way to have a cell phone, and they can absolutely transact. And so if the man goes into the city to work, he can send money back to the family. Remittances can come in. If a woman can't get out of her house in India, a banking correspondent from the postal, used to be part of the postal system, goes out to her. I met a widow who, she didn't know her age, neither did her kids, but I think she was probably in her late 80s. She deserved a government payment. Her husband had died. She's pretty much homebound. She's getting her payment. And she didn't live in the affluent part of Delhi. She lived on the outskirts. So there are absolutely ways to do this. And what you see, which I've seen, for instance, in Indonesia, is once the person has their digital ID and they start to get some money and then they start to get a job, it builds, and they start to build other assets, and they even collectivize together to get collective insurance, which you can also do with these systems. So, but you have to start with the idea that this is for everybody, and this is for democratization. It will bring everybody into society. And that informal sector, there is huge amount of money in the informal sector, so it starts to bring that into the formal sector as well, which has pluses and minuses, I think, for citizens versus government. So that's another conversation.
We're okay with those. Yeah. Managing Director, you were nodding there too. This mindset change, I think, that these systems are built for everybody and should, from the beginning stages, be built for all.
It is absolutely essential to also create incentives to get into these loops in which provision of benefits digitally insensitizes people to get digital ID. And then when they have digital ID, they want to have more of their services delivered digitally. It is so easy to unleash this potential, but it can only happen if we think about it as a global public good. And I know that there has to be a platform for private sector to benefit, yes, but if it is not thought through from the very beginning as accessible and for the public good, then we risk to fragment it and not get the full benefits. One thing India has done that I admire is that they create a software and then they make this software available to everyone. So India creates a software to allow acceleration of vaccinations. Any place you are in India, you can plug in, you can find where vaccination is available, you go and get it. And then they make it available to the whole world. So then Indonesia can use it, other countries can tap into it. So that bringing this mentality that there are elements that have to be public good, even if they are also platforms for private sector to benefit. This concept, this mentality is what we need to interject everywhere. And I cannot think of a better example than what we have seen in the last years during COVID in India and in other countries. And now I want to make an advertisement. May I?
Please.
All of this also requires agility and flexibility. And here is your adaptable and flexible IMF. I was coughing through this mic. I kicked it out, and I got a handheld like you, Melinda.
The key to flexibility. What would you change, Nandan, if you could go back and recognize areas that perhaps mistakes were made, it was a learning curve in the beginning? What would you go back and fix, like your best advice for other nations looking at the early stages of this? What can you circumvent? How do you save time? How do you be more efficient in the process? How do you build trust earlier?
No, I think what we would change is we could have done it even faster.
You could have done it faster.
Yeah, I mean, this actually,
I mean, you did it pretty fast.
Yeah, but it could be even faster.
Okay.
I think the important thing is that as I said, shared vision, shared purpose has been very good. And like ONDC, which has just come up, it's going to really change the way we do e-commerce in India. So I think it's really fascinating to see how there's this broad coalition of shared purpose, which is allowing us to accelerate all these changes.
In terms of the private sector, though, is it a case of get on board with us or get lost? I mean, does there have to be a sort of pressure point from the government to say, this is the way we're going to do this, and
the private
we can make this work?
Julia, the private sector is completely involved, and they are among the biggest beneficiaries of this infrastructure. Let's take payments. Mr. Sitharaman talked about UPI. The #1 company on UPI is a company called PhonePe.
Yeah.
Whom does it belong to? Walmart. The #2 company on UPI is Google. So the architecture is done in a way that you have public rails, and then markets compete, and that's the beauty of the model.
Dan, because for the private sector to innovate, in the end, a company cares about profits, and the incentives have to be aligned. This is key too. If you're going to go into a country and innovate, and you're big in India, but the job has evolved.
Look, most great platforms are open platforms, and this is a really important technical requirement for it. If you have a great open platform with a defined set of APIs and software development kits to go on, you innovate on top. And that's really an important element. Every great platform is open, and it enables things to adapt. So when COVID broke out, you could do vaccination and that kind of thing. Here in the US, the flip side, we do not have that in place right now. We sent out 40 million checks to recipients, in the US, checks where most of them have already left that place and they're living with their parents or somewhere else. And if they do get a check, they need to leave their house, or they're not supposed to leave their house, and cash it and pay like 5 to 8% to cash that check. This is kind of why I think this idea of it's not available yet, but will it be available? The answer is clearly yes, because the cost-benefit analysis is so clearly in favor of digital. And also, remember, everything about digital is crashing in pricing. The cost of processing is closing down towards zero. The cost of storage is moving towards zero. The cost of broadband is coming down dramatically. So this is the way of technology. Cost structures come down, accessibility goes up, and then people innovate on top of open platforms to be able to create applications and benefits for customers or citizens. And I think this is an opportunity now where we have the chance to think about this as like a moonshot for the global economy. So many of the issues can be solved in technology. Not everything, obviously, but so many. Making things faster, less expensive, more efficient. That is all rooted in technology. We need to do that in responsible ways, as India has shown. Like, I don't think anybody would have believed that India would have created a digital ID for how many billion?
1.3 billion. 1.4 billion.
1.4 billion people with biometrics on it and a whole stack around it.
And total cost of 1.5 billion.
Yeah, I remember when we first met on this.
So important.
What?
Just say that again. The statistic is so important.
It was about $1 per person.
Cost.
$1 per person.
$1 per person.
And
it's, as the minister said, saved $27 billion.
Yeah, yeah. So there's, what kind of leakage was there in India before on corruption and other things? It was giant for every dollar spent. And now it's direct to the consumer, direct to the beneficiary with no leakage whatsoever into a low-cost bank account. This is our opportunity. We need to come together to take advantage of it. This is why DPI is so important. This is why combinations of the public and private sector are so important as well. To your point, if the government of India wasn't the anchor tenant of that, I don't think you would have had the same adoption. If just a private company does something innovative, it's not big enough. And we need to figure out how to work together to drive this. But the opportunity is immense, and I would say that it is a moral imperative for us to go after this, not just a technological opportunity.
And obviously, it is not by chance that the Indian economy is one of the fastest growing economies in Asia. When we look at the world today, we are all worried that low productivity and low growth is going to hold us back, hold the aspirations to bring better opportunities to people. We have to break through it, and this is what India has done. When you look at the projections we have for the economy now, Asia is going to produce 2/3 of global growth this year. And within Asia, India is one of the countries that, even with a little bit of slowdown, is still in the 7% growth area. If we don't use this opportunity to shake up the access of people to goods and services, but also the chance for micro enterprises to blossom and to add to that growth we are finding elusive at the moment, we are for a very sad future. And I cannot stress enough how important it is that we recognize there are only that many transformative pathways we can take. And digital is absolutely one of them.
I want to just build on kind of 2 points that have been made. One is this point about graft in the system.
Yeah.
You know, as a donor or a donor country, we all want to know that the money was spent well.
Right.
And so if you go back in the history of development 15 years ago, the big fear was you would do foreign aid or you do a loan and it would go and it would end up in somebody else's pocket, not in the beneficiaries. So the system just cleans that out. And so the Indian government has spent money as a donor nation to other low-income countries. It means I can count on my money being spent well. And it also means, as we said, we're bringing people into the system, but as they start to get at all, you know, some money in their hands and some credit, you're building financial literacy. So we have 2 experiments now that have been done, one in India and in Bangladesh, but we're also showing that once women are on the system, they're actually more likely to go get a job and go into the labor force. And what are we all talking about at the macroeconomic level right now? We want to bring people back into the labor force and bring women into the labor force. And so that building of financial literacy that happens over our lifetimes, I think we're just on the cusp of it in some of these countries, and I think it's very exciting.
And it's reinforcing. I think there were sort of 2 light bulb moments there. The cost per person of this is incredibly low in a world of competing issues, challenges, and we're talking about $1 trillion for this, $1 trillion for that. The cost of doing this is low on a relative basis and so transformative. The second light bulb moment, I think, is the point that Dan was making, and Nandan, you reinforced, which is the private sector actually couldn't do this. It needs the government to create the foundations that we build upon, which is crucial and fundamental. And Melinda, I just want to add to what you were saying. What about pooling resources? What about donors all talking to each other, whether it's Sweden or Ireland or whoever it is that's donating the money? Are they all talking to try and reinforce what is actually a relatively small amount of money but could be huge in impact?
Yes, there are several different communities that obviously impact donations, but there's the philanthropic. That's actually the smallest, though. We have to look at ODA, which is Overseas Development Assistance, which is actually going down in the world. And you've got to look at things like IDA. The grants that are made through that, again, we want all of that money to be efficient. So yes, there's a pool of those groups that have absolutely come together. And as Kristalina, who championed some of this at the World Bank, we've got different tracks going. Because everybody's seeing the benefit of this, and no one wants to be a closed loop system. That was the first one actually happened in Kenya, and it was closed loop, and so the expense of it was very, very high, and so very quickly you could see, no, it needed to be an open system. Now it's come along with so much more sophistication, and the digital tools, let's be fair, are more sophisticated in the back end. So absolutely, but my sense is that we need to put more money in. So one of the things that I actually took as a foundation partner to the G7 several years ago, finance minister meeting track, was a plan to have the G7 start to finance some of this. But I think we need to look at it through World Bank and through IMF as well. It's both important, but it's also incredibly cost effective.
This is the point, the bang for the buck, forgive the term, is huge here, which I think is important. I'm conscious of time, so you all have 1 minute each, if you don't mind. Just a positive thing that we have to walk away from, and what gives you greatest optimism that we are at a transformational moment, and that DPI can be leveraged for great good. Dan, you're going to kick us off.
I was afraid you'd come to me first.
Sorry. I can come to you second if you like. You were just looking so intense and excited there about saying something.
I was thinking as you were
Sorry,
asking the question.
yes.
Look, I think the benefits of digitization go well beyond kind of like payments and other things. It just, to what Lynn was just saying, you can use data and information now in ways that we never dreamed about. You can make working capital loans to small businesses without doing typical FICO scores or any of that kind of thing. You can make them in places where there are banking deserts and banks aren't even around anymore. And when you make those loans to small businesses, their business grows on average by 22%. They are great stewards of that capital. They just don't have access to it. And when they grow, their communities start to become vibrant. And this becomes this very positive, vibrant cycle of hope that can be created. And so this is, Her Majesty and I spent a lot of time talking about this. This is what drives us. This is what enables us to, day in and day out, care about making a difference in the world, because we think that this is an opportunity for us, and that's what makes me most optimistic.
A good message. Melinda?
I am beyond excited about this digital opportunity, because for so long we have talked about empowering women or women's empowerment. But what's happened is women just keep hitting their heads against these ceilings that exist that are societal norms, right? And breaking down societal norms is one of the hardest things to do. But with digital, you're sidestepping it. And so what happens is you reach a woman out in her community, you reach her in her township, you reach her where she goes by the train station if she can get out. And all of a sudden, she is fully empowered, which she has money. And the thing that we know from great economics is a woman spends her money differently than a man. Not better, not bad, not worse, but differently. And we know in a low-income country, she spends it on her children's health, her health, and the children's education. So talk about a flywheel effect of momentum. So to me, this is one of the ways to bring people into society who've been left out and on the margins for so long. And you tap into that potential, and oh my gosh, give us, one generation. I'm thrilled to see what's gonna come from that.
To take on this point, I think India has 50 million merchants who take UPI digital payments using a QR code. And many of them are women who run vegetable carts and take a 10 rupee payment. And there are two reasons why they benefit. One is productivity, because they can put a sound box there and it just speaks that the money has been received. So even as she's dispensing the vegetables, she knows the money has come. She doesn't have to, do both things at the same time. Second, safety. Because in the earlier model, by the end of the day, she would have a lot of cash with her. And she would be very nervous, either of extortion or theft. And now, all the cash is in the account, so nobody can take money out of her. So suddenly, it's far more safer for the woman entrepreneur. So these are all other unexpected side benefits of doing this. But I'll end by saying that, I've been in this town for 5 days and doing a lot of this DPI stuff. I can sense the moment has arrived. I can sense it in every meeting, in every conversation. And I think we all have a collective goal of having 50 countries implement DPI in 5 years. And I'm sure we'll get there.
50 in 5.
Yep.
So what gives me confidence? One is the unintended silver lining of COVID. Before COVID, we would say the future is digital. With COVID, the future has arrived, and there is no escape from it. 2, India taking on the global stage, because what is now a huge success for India, I am very hopeful would be a huge success for the world. India is chairing the G20. It has embraced this theme. It's going to drive it in a very decisive manner. 3, Ajay Banga at the World Bank. Ajay comes, former MasterCard, absolutely entirely committed to financial inclusion. And I think you would see a fabulous dance, IMF, World Bank, of victory of these institutions doing the right thing for our members.
It's a wave, and it's coming, and it's just beginning. I want to say thank you to our panel. Thank you so much. And before we end, I just want to say how thankful I am that we can have a free and open and a fair discussion here in debate today. And just to remind everybody, our panel and everybody here, that it's not the case in other nations. And as we're sitting here talking, I just wanted to take a moment to remind ourselves that journalist Evan Gershkovich remains wrongfully imprisoned in Russia, and that we have to keep talking about it, and it has to remain front and center in the minds of policymakers for all the tough decisions that they have to make on a daily basis. And just to say to his family, his friends, and to Evan himself, and to Paul Whelan, who also is imprisoned, that we will not forget them, we will keep talking about them, and we will keep talking about them until the day they're released. Thank you for your time, and thank you.